Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've come ready to enjoy another great day reading the Wall Street Journal, the best newspaper in the world by far. And I think many people share with me less biased, good news, and a wide range of subjects. And those of you that watch me for a while have seen, we talked about left-handers, those odd 10% of people that exist in the world for some unknown reason. And it's got a great subset of articles. A lot of people think it's all financial and in focus with the Wall Street Journal. They couldn't be farther from the truth. But I always suggest you read a newspaper a day. I'd like to read two. When I was working in Chicago, I would read two newspapers a day, one going in and one coming back on the train. And also really recommend it if you're staying, especially an expat or you're staying in a foreign area for a while. It's amazing how much you can pick up about culture and how a country runs by a local paper. I spent a lot of time in Japan, in Tokyo. I think called the Japan Times was a paper in English that I could read there. I couldn't read Japanese, very little of Japanese can I read. But some of the local people were pretty impressed at things I knew about the culture. And I got to tell you, I had probably a library by the time I left Japan of 20 books, at least, on Japan, including travel books and so on, culture books, food books. A food book is probably one of the most important books you should buy in Japan. If you want to succeed in business and have relationships with Japanese, understand their food and appreciate it, you'll get far. But I had this library of lots of books, including some on the language. But the newspaper taught me things because it was current culture, right? And it taught me things I couldn't get out of a book that maybe was already 4 or 5 years old. And so I learned a lot about how Japanese culture works. And the Japan Times was a great paper for that. So I recommend doing that in cities when you can. Take time to read that in the morning with your coffee. So LeBron is a bargain. So many of you know that LeBron made $37.4 million last year. And I know there's some of you out there that criticize that and say there's no one person can be worth that much money. I've always believed in a market economy. So if he can make that much money, he's worth it. That's the way a market economy works. If he wasn't, they wouldn't pay it. Actually, the Wall Street Journal article is very interesting. He's worth a lot more. He may be worth as much as twice that salary. And you say, well, that's crazy, right? It's not. So consider he just won the championship, right? Now, of course, he won it with another great player on his team, which tends to be a pattern of his, and we'll go through that. But he just won another championship. By the way, he's in 9 of the last 10 finals. James has been there. Now, you might argue there's other people been there surrounding. Absolutely. He's an expert at getting great players around. The last year that he missed it, he was injured and had horrible players around him. But that changed real quick with addition of one superstar with him this year. But so he made $37.4 million. You could argue with him being in 9 of the 10 last finals that he was a key part of that you had to pay him to get to the last dance. And you can make that argument very easily. So with that in mind, there were 5 NBA players last year that made more money than LeBron James. He made $37 million. There were 20 players that made more than $30 million. So there were 20 players that were within 3 to 6% of him. Actually, probably 1 to 6% of him. Okay, and you say, where were they in the playoffs? And by the way, there are 50 players that made more than $25 million last year. So it's just a comparison, and him being at the top of that, and nobody can, I think, argue with he's at the top of that list as far as pay. He should be the highest paid person in NBA, which he's not. That even brings home that $37.4 million for James is cheap. They got him on the cheap. And why is that? That's because they've distorted the market system in the NBA. They have a cap, a salary cap, that I think came around in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so, because of the salary cap, he's misvalued. And he knows that. His agent knows that. The team knows it. And the team owner, of course, knows it. But that's the way the NBA works. And the union voted for that. So I blame them. Keep in mind, let's go back to 1998 when Jordan was with the Bulls. Now, you might argue at that time Jordan should have been the highest paid player in the NBA. He was making $33.1 million. So 22 years ago, Jordan was making $4 million less than James made this year. So James is a bargain, but thank you for the salary cap. And the article had a quote in there I liked. A championship is where players outperform their contracts. And that's really interesting. In fact, it went on to talk, and I won't spend any time on it, but the 3 or 4 kind of bit players that they brought on to surround the 2 superstars really outperformed their contracts. And they got the right kind of people that could work with 2 superstars. But he's the best player right now in the NBA. But more important, from the Wall Street Journal's perspective, he's the best investment. A pay that's probably half of what he's worth, and he'll bring you, as long as you surround him with the right team, he'll bring you a championship about 9 out of 10 times he's going to bring you a championship. Enough about LeBron. The new iPhones. I won't talk a lot about them. I'm trying to even figure if I'm going to get one. I may upgrade my wife's iPhone only because we have a place to send her 2-year-old iPhone to that would really help somebody else. So I may get her a new iPhone. I may just sit still. I think I've got an iPhone 10, those of you people that care. So, but one of the new features, the iPhone, I thought I'd share, and you may not hear this very many places. You're hearing about the size and the processor speed and the battery and oh, by the way, the new telephoto camera. But MagSafe is being brought back. Now, MagSafe is, basically a wireless charging, but it's more than that. And so that's why I wanted to bring that up, because you may not see this in many other places. So MagSafe solves a problem with wireless charging. If you've been wireless charging with an iPhone, you know that you can set your phone on top of a wireless charger, or your watch, by the way, and I do with an iWatch every day, and it won't charge. And you know why. There's a magic spot, and you have to find that spot. I think it was a real screw up by Apple. I can't imagine that people sat in a conference room and did this and realized this was a problem. And I really, if you're like me, if I put my watch in that charger, I have to wait until I see the lightning bolt to know that, oh yeah, I've got it in the right spots. It's easier with a watch, harder with the phones. And so they've solved that, and they got multiple magnets on the back of this iPhone now, and it solves that problem. Is it on the right spot? But it also gives you a lot of other features. Now, I want you to think about this. It opens a whole line of accessories that you can now put on your phone. For one thing, I think cases now can be mounted magnetically, and so they don't have to clip around corners, which is interesting because the new iPhone has not got a rounded corners. It goes back to about iPhone 4 or 5 that had the square type flat edges. And so you could have a whole lot of cases that fit on very quickly with magnetic and hold on. And also, like, there's already, I think Belkin's released a wallet that attaches to the back of your phone. It's about half the size, and you could put driver's license and a credit card and so on right on the back of your iPhone. I think that's pretty slick. I may do that, by the way, if I go that way. So a whole lot of accessories. I assume there's going to be some kind of stands that use this magnet too, like a car stand, a house stand, and so on. So I think you ought to look at that. By the way, this whole idea, this MagSafe, for those of you that are Apple aficionados, and I've got one, Danny will recognize this right away. This Mac Pro had MagSafe chargers. And they were real interesting because if you tripped over your cable, instead of pulling the whole laptop down with it, it would just pull off. The magnet part would pull off of the the Mac Pro or the Macintosh laptop, and it wouldn't pull it with it. And so, if you've used it a while, it's pretty interesting. It's got a magnetic, so you know when it catches. And I use it on a Mac Air for years. By the way, those of you a little trivia where this came from originally, I'm convinced it came from. I'm convinced is that it came from the Asian markets. Asians had a lot of hot kettles and rice cookers up on counters plugged in. And lots of these used magnetic AC cords that connected to that. I think the Japanese circuit was 108 volts AC. And I have trying to think the name of it. Nojirushi, I'm getting close. Somebody will help me out. That came from Japan. I got a rice cooker that, I don't know, it's $140, computerized and everything, has one of those magnetic. So if a kid comes by, grabs the cable, it won't bring a hot kettle of rice or worse, a hot kettle of hot water down on them. And of course, many of the Asians leave a kettle of hot water and a kettle of rice, a pot of rice on all the day, 24 hours a day. And so, it's always on. So that was a danger part. And I think that's where I digress, but I teach you something that's much. Zojirushi, Joe has helped me out. And I think that's pretty close to how it's spelled. Thanks, Joe. Zojirushi and famous brand. If you ever want really good rice, get a Zojirushi computerized rice cooker and put a couple tablespoons of sake in with your rice. You heard it from Tata Lee. I know how to rice. The sake makes the rice sweet and just adds a kick to it that's just really neat. It just sweetens up the rice, and it's really good. I saw that in a sushi shop in downtown Tokyo, about 3 levels up from the street, a place that tourists would never find. So renters heading to suburbia. So the vacancy rate in cities right now is 9.5% on apartments, condos, and so on, not including homes for sale, just the rental properties. Suburbs is down to 6%. By the way, cities, the rate is going up on vacancy. The suburbs, it's dropped from 6.5% to 7% down to 6% now. So, people that were downtown are moving to suburbs, no question. Many of them aren't commuting to the city anymore, so they don't need to be there. They're not commuting to their office. And by the way, there's nothing to do in cities. I think the recent report I've seen on New York City is that only 25% of the coffee shops and delis are back in business. And many of the theaters are not back in business. Theater district is shut down, so on. Times Square, they said, is just nothing going on in Times Square. So there's nothing to do in cities. And then last, the expense. And they showed an example of downtown Houston, a 2-bedroom apartment is $2,600. If you just go 15 miles west of downtown, that drops to $1,500. Now, to a single person or a couple people sharing, a 2-bedroom, $1,000, $1,100 a month savings is huge when not much is happening downtown. So, so that's enough for suburbia and where it may be going for the next year or so. So another just observation I've got is, and I don't see anybody talking about it, but where is former President Obama? So we got an election going on for Democrats. Obama's got to be upset at the number of things that Trump overturned of his, because they were done by executive fiat, you might say, and Trump is had his share of executive fiat and gotten rid of a lot of things that Trump put in place. And so you would think he would be frustrated with that and would want that to stop. He's very popular. He's especially very popular with Democrats, but he's very popular across. I mean, remember, many conservatives voted for President Obama. Supposedly, the white racists voted for Obama in droves. And by the way, this is his VP. This is his VP picked twice. Okay, and so he seems to be missing in action. You tell me what he's doing, but you would think he would be out on the circuit making some, because he could draw big crowds, certainly larger than Biden is drawing, and probably could compete very well with Trump in drawing very large crowds. Very popular guy. I like the guy, and I didn't like some of his policies, but I like the guy, and I think there's plenty of conservatives like me that would love to go see Obama speak again. So we'll see. So the Supreme Court is letting the census end on time. So there was a case that went before the Supreme Court just yesterday and got solved and said, look, the administration and the Census Bureau wanted to end the count by the end of October in 2020. And so the Supreme Court yesterday, with one dissent, Sotomayor dissented, one of the liberal members of the court. I read her dissent very quickly. I'm going to need to spend some time on it. It was real hard for me to pull a single thing that I could share out with you easily, saying this is why she dissented. The critics have said, it would undercount minorities. I think Sotomayor is just talking about there was no reason not to delay it a little bit longer. It wasn't going to hurt lots of people, and they could have delayed it. I think that's primarily where she was coming from. The critics worry that the minorities were not counted. I put a question down because I didn't have a quick answer, but when we do the census, and we always have this problem, why are minorities harder to count? Now, I understand some of them. The Indians, many Indians live off on their own. That's an issue, by the way, with COVID. And they live in clusters. They live out off the grid, typically where water's not, no electricity. And it's just an interesting way their culture deals with houses and where they live. So I understand some of that, but why are minorities harder to count? Now, some of them may be the lack of internet, because if you had internet, you could, put your own census in. Maybe a mistrust of government, and I especially understand that with Hispanics. If I was an illegal Hispanic, I'd hear you tell me that no, the census is not a way of, connecting you to the immigration board, and they're going to take you out of the government. I'd just be very careful, and I probably wouldn't contribute in the census. I wouldn't see where it would help anything anyways. And so I can understand some of that. But interesting that they don't want to be counted. By the way, 99.8% of the 147 million housing units in the U.S. have been reached by the Census Bureau. An amazing job. I don't know how they do it. It's a project I would not like to run. Next article, Amazon suppressing Michael Brown's story. So there's a new film out now, a documentary is what you should call it, is called What Killed Michael Brown. And it really is out by a famous race scholar, Shelby Steele. I think Shelby is with the Hoover Institute out at Stanford University, a group that I really like. They've got some really smart people in that group. When you see Hoover Institute, a lot of the liberals don't like them. They think it's a bit conservative. I've always thought it was interesting. A very conservative intellectual think tank is located on a very liberal university, but maybe they each deserve each other. But he talks about what liberals have developed, what he calls poetic truth. And he says poetic truth is at odds with objective truth. Sorry, hard to say that. But it helps advance a narrative. So that's what poetic truth is. It doesn't have to agree with objective truth, but I have a story and it matches my story. I know we use that word narrative a lot and just translate story. Some people don't like that. I think it's a better descriptive. But so I've got this story. I want to support it, and the way I do it is with poetic truth. And so, to give you an example, the poetic truth that came out after the Michael Brown story hit was he was executed. He was assassinated. Remember, hands up, don't shoot? A complete lie. Never happened. But we still hear people today, and still people in protest do the hands up, don't shoot. Never happened, right? And all of the evidence points to the fact that it never happened. And so that becomes poetic truth, because while the story is developing, and while smart people sit there and wait for facts to come out, film to be reviewed, all the evidence to be gathered, poetic truth builds an audience. And it builds a group of believers. And by the way, they won't go away ever. And don't think you can convince them. If you've ever tried this, try to deal with the fine people on both sides hoax of Trump. You won't get there. They will not look at the rest of the video and the rest of the context and listen to what Trump really said a minute after he said fine people on both sides. And I understand it. I get it. I'm done with those people, because they're not, they have poetic truth. And by the way, I've talked about maybe writing a book about truth versus fact. And this poetic truth has rung a bell with me. I like it. But in the Michael Brown case, and despite the grand jury, the multiple Justice Department investigations, remember that, and he says today, I go to Ferguson, Missouri, and I talk to black people. They still believe that Michael Brown was killed out of racial animus, that it was racial hatred, and that's why he's dead. So, and then he goes on to say, the protest in Ferguson and elsewhere around this racial animus has not helped Ferguson at all. So Ferguson property values have gone down since the Michael Brown killing, and the crime has gone up, and the schools have gotten worse. So all of this protest and this story, this narrative, and this poetic truth, in the end, the measurement you want to say is, has my neighborhood got better? It's not gotten any better. It's gotten worse, in fact. So he goes on to say a very controversial statement, but it's becoming more and more obvious as Trump and the Republicans gain more black votes. And that's an interesting shift that all of us ought to watch. He says the progressive agenda is not the black agenda. And he says they're going to start to see this in certain areas like Ferguson, where they make a story, but it's not helping the community. After they leave and after the protests are all done, the city's not any better. By the way, Amazon has this movie on Amazon Prime. You can't watch it right now. You say, Tata Lee, why can't we watch it? Well, they're doing a content review of the film. This is amazing to me. I watch Amazon Prime. There is lots of junk on there. There is lots of documentaries out there with nonsense in the document. Trust me, I'm a real fan of documentaries. There's crazy documentaries out there with spaceships and things that we all know. Any intellectual would look at this and say it's crazy. But Amazon is doing a content review. So we'll see. Again, back to my looking at the major companies censoring information, maybe Twitter, maybe Facebook. This is what we're going to end up with. There's somebody going to be making a judgment about this Michael Brown film. What is the harm of another view? And I talked about this the other day, with the gassing of the Holocaust, with gassing of millions of Jews. There's other views out there, and Facebook are starting to shut those views off. I don't say that I agree with those diverse views. I'm just saying that these companies now are deciding that there are the arbiters. And by the way, be very careful who your arbiters are. Last article, Supreme Court. Supreme Court decisions are not at risk. So if you've been watching the Amy Coney Barrett hearings, the Democrats, well, first of all, you can see that they have a plan. They've all got together. And I assume Republicans do this together. But they got in committee, right? There are no Republicans allowed. They said, okay, how are we going to handle the Supreme Court hearing? What are we going to do? What best will help our position? And they did this. Okay, late night, maybe a scotch in hand, cigar, and they said, we got to work together on presenting our case. And so Roger said it's 6 p.m. and we will tell you what to think. And I think there's some truth to that. It's interesting that the Democrats tell Democrats what to do. You'd think that they all say, I'm going to be independent and represent you. No, they're going to represent the party first. And you're third or fourth down the list after some people that come in and influence them elsewhere. But anyways, I digress. Roger, you made me digress. So what the Democrats have been focusing on is the cases hanging in the balance. So what they picture is there's multiple cases going on that if Amy Coney Barrett was put in place, all these cases would be overturned overnight. It's intellectual dishonesty at its best, okay? Or a lie at its worst. So first of all, the health one. You're going to lose your insurance. They got pictures. Little kids. I love the little kids. Pictures of little kids. The little kids on oxygen. He's going to lose his oxygen. He's going to die. My little grandchild is going to die. And I know I make fun of this. And I really care about the little kid that's on oxygen, okay? He will not die. He will still get oxygen. Congress will make sure that something happens if the Affordable Care Act gets overturned. But the fact of the matter is, and many Democrats in that know, the Affordable Care Act probably will not be overturned by Supreme Court when it comes to it. These AGs that have done this, by the way, it's a belief by many conservatives. This AG suit, attorney generals from multiple states that have brought this up. By the way, their suit basically is once you did away with the tax, on Obamacare, which was the mandatory, right? You had to have it, otherwise pay a tax. Now it's not in place anymore, and you have to kick the whole law out because that was an integral part of the law. So therefore, because that's gone away, the whole law is invalid. By the way, most people believe that that's a very political attack on that and won't survive the Supreme Court. In fact, many people believe the vote could be 9-0 against the AG suit. So this could go down in record fashion. But if you hear the Dems today, and I've been listening on and off all day while I worked on this and a few other things, they keep coming back to it. Political hot buttons these days, the Democrats have polled, they know that health insurance is a big deal, even though there's only 10, 12 million people on Obamacare, and I think 20 million total, I think, with the Medicare part of it. Really not a lot of people would even be affected. I know those 10 million people are important, but of the 300 million people, very small percentage. So, but there's also another thing I wanted to bring through, and I think this is something you haven't heard, and I may increase your knowledge in this area. There's this issue when Supreme Court looks at something, they look at something called reliance interest. So for instance, in the healthcare thing, they would say, okay, how long has this been going on? And it's been 6 years now, I think, if I remember right, 6, 7 years. And they look at that and they say, well, how many people have been on there? And they say, well, 10 to 20 million people over the 6 years. So they have to use that to consider overturning that law, the reliance of interest. And those of you that are interested in reading up on that, just Google reliance of interest Supreme Court, and you'll get a ton of material. And it's very interesting. So you take that and you say, okay, what about the ACA? Okay, there's 20 million people you got to consider. DACA, there's 20 million people, kids you got to consider, and they've been on there a long time. They've gained, they relied on it. Gay marriages, that's another one I keep saying. No, it's going to overturn gay marriages. What are these marriages going to do? They'll be illegal. Well, the Supreme Court's going to look at reliance of interest and say there's thousands of gay marriages, and they relied on that. So is there some kind of reliance of interest we got to look at? So the other thing I would point out, and I pointed this out before, and conservatives don't do this enough, the conservative courts have shown that it is more heterodox than one dominated by liberals. Now, the word heterodox, I guess I'd teach you a new word, but it's really not conforming to orthodox standards or beliefs. So conservative courts have not shown that you can predict how they're going to vote in political areas. And Justice John Roberts was a classic case of getting on the court and immediately being the deciding vote on one of the ACA cases. And so if you go back through Supreme Court history, you'll find that Democratic, so-called liberal conservatives vote more on political ideological lines than do a conservative court. So you got to ask yourself, why is that happening? So why is that happening? Because, and this is key, because they rely on textual analysis. Okay, they don't go back to ideology. Okay, they don't go back to political. They rely on what the text originally said, and they're less swayed back and forth by their ideological beliefs. If you want to predict votes and you want to gamble on it with the Supreme Court, not sure how you can do that. I'm sure there's a market somewhere in the world for gambling on Supreme Court decisions. Right. People gamble on everything. Gamble on the liberal side of the court. You will win more often. Trust me on this. So, and this reliance of interest, by the way, the observation I'd have on the hearing is I haven't heard this brought up at the hearing at all. And to me, it's the one area that the conservatives could bring up and say, look, Mrs. Barrett, are you going to use reliance of interest? Of course you will say, are you lose? Not related to a case, just say, we'll use this when you are considering cases. She can't not say that. Okay, she will say that. So why is it not being used? And I'm writing a big question mark past it. I think it's an opportunity missed, an opportunity to educate some of the senators that many of the cases that they hold so dear and that they fear that democracy will be overturned by an overturning of gay marriage, ACA, gun rights. I can go down the list. I think they have less to fear of these being overturned, and they're using it as a political stand to make political speeches in the midst of an election system. And this is the problem we have when we have TV cameras in these hearings. We've asked for the worst in the senators, and we got just exactly what we wanted. And I think some of these hearings, by the way, if we didn't have TV cameras, it would last about a fourth as long, and half the senators wouldn't even be there, which is what happened before. So, hey, thanks for the comments today, and appreciate all of them, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. See you tomorrow with another great Wall Street Journal update. Have a great evening. Enjoy yourself. Cheers.